New episode of Itali-Echo. Welcome back to WNTN Radio. This is your host, and this is Itali-Echo, the only bilingual Italian-American show in the greater Boston area. Welcome back. Today, my first guest is Randy Seedorff. He's a singer, songwriter, and pastor, and he turned his life towards God after being held up at gunpoint. Welcome.
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to your show today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you for joining us. So, first of all, tell us about your album, Begin Again. What can listeners expect from it?
Well, Begin Again was a project that we did in the winter during COVID, and it's it's an album that I've always wanted to do. It's kind of a roots album for me. I grew up. My parents were my family were all musicians. Okay, my mother was a country music artist,
Mm.
and so I grew up listening to country music. And when I say country music, I mean uh, uh, old country music like Roy Acuff, the Grand Ole Opry from the 1950s, that era of country music. And so my uncle was also a Nashville studio musician. So those were big influences in my life. The music from this album has got that country flavor to it. One of the songs on there was one of my mother's most requested songs on her radio program. And the original material all has kind of a country flavor to it. Country rock, lots of edge to it.
Wonderful. So, as I mentioned before, I know you had a very traumatic experience that led you to Christian music. Tell us about it if you can.
Well, I was in the hospitality industry for years, and I managed a restaurant for much of that. One morning when I went to work, four men broke into the restaurant where I was working and held me up at gunpoint. And after emptying the safe, they tied me up on the floor using the cords from the computer and the phones. Um, in that process, when they were tying me up, they fractured one of the vertebrae in my back, and then had a conversation about whether they were going to shoot me or whether they were going to cut my throat. Um, they decided to shoot me, and so laying on the floor face down was a reality. You know, the reality of the situation really started to come into focus. And I just started to look back at the last couple of years of my life when I was really not in alignment with what I had grown up to believe and with my faith. And so I repented and asked God to forgive me for all the things that I'd been doing. And at that moment, when the gun was pressed up against the back of my head and I heard the safety click off, there was a honk on the horn in the parking lot, and the the robbers left without shooting me. And it was just there was a split second there, and I don't know if it was audible or not, but there was just this moment when I felt forgiveness pour into my heart, and I just felt this huge relief, this burden lifted off of me. And so that's kind of how that all happened, and that set my life on a different course, on a different journey completely. So
I'm so sorry this happened to you. Thank you for sharing your experience. And let's go back to music. What has been the single most exciting thing in your music career?
well, it's really hard to pick one. I've had so many exciting things happen recently. We've had over the last 4 years, we've had four number one songs in Christian music, South Africa and Europe. But I think the highlight of my career was when I was with the Promise Keepers organization. We did stadium concerts and had an opportunity to sing in front of 100,000 men. in the stadium at Arrowhead Stadium here in
Wow.
Kansas City, and just the sound of 100,000 men singing, it literally shook the platform where I was standing, and I've never experienced anything like that before or since. So
I can just imagine. Wonderful. And how do you balance music with being a pastor?
well, being a pastor is not a 9 to 5 job, or it's really a calling. And when you've been called to that, it's a lifetime calling. Um, I currently serve in Liberty, Missouri, as a staff pastor. I do music there and also discipleship, pastoral care, and things like that. And that's the first priority in my life. But those two things intersect a lot. This past weekend, we did 2 concerts at a prison here in St. Joseph, Missouri, where we had the opportunity to sing and play for hundreds of inmates there, and bring some hope and bring some joy to them. So music and my life as a pastor intersect because of music, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you, Randy. So now we're going to play a couple of songs. The first one is Never Alone, and the second is Family Tree. What are these songs about?
Well, Never Alone is really a song that I wrote about my brother, who was a Vietnam veteran, and he suffered deeply from PTSD when he came back. And if you listen closely to the lyric of the song, um, it it outlines that the slightest thing can take him back to one of those moments that where he was traumatized. And it's something that we shared together. I had some PTSD from my robbery experience. So it's a little bit about myself too, a little self-reflection. Um, so that's kind of the gist of that song. Begin Again is uh, the song Family Tree is kind of was the first single off of that album. And I took 3 things in my life that I felt were landmark things in my life, that were etched on my memory. And I think about singing with my family during my childhood, the birth of my son, and the day that I accepted Christ. Those were all, landmark events in my life that I'll never forget. And I think everyone has those kind of events in their life that they can relate to. Something that it's really etched on your memory, and that it's unforgettable. So that's what that song is about.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today. And guys, stay tuned because now we're going to play Randy Seedorff's beautiful songs. Thank you again.
Thank you.